I want to start, knowing me, I'm going to refer to a hymn. I want to start by reading a verse of a hymn by my favorite hymn writer, Shirley Arena Murray, who recently passed away in New Zealand. Her hymns are the most, she has the most hymns of anyone in our hymnal. It's Give Thanks for Life, 563. The second verse says, Give thanks for those who made their life a light, caught from the Christ flame, bursting through the night, who touched the truth, who burned for what is right. Hallelujah. To which I can only add, Amen. I was thinking of what Lester is one of the first ones I think that to do one of these Sunday school biographies. He kept saying, I was blessed. And that's got to be the theme of what I'm going to say this morning. Nobody seemed to know much about our family history till I decided several years ago to do a little digging on my own. Louita was doing a Suzuki festival out in Salt Lake City. If you know Salt Lake City, you know the Mormons have a lot of interesting stuff there. You can go down to the Family History Museum and find records from every church and almost everywhere, births and deaths and so forth. I spent the week. I finally located my ancestors in England. The line that actually came over, and first of all, let me say the Clothiers seemed to be called that because they were makers of cloth, clothiers. They all came. It seems like from the little Somerset County south in south edge of England. That's a big sheep area, and they all seem to have originated there. There's a line that did the Strawbridge and Clothier department store in Philadelphia. And I was there a number of years ago. It's changed hands now, but I bought a tie there, and the clerk, when she saw my credit card, looked at me, and I shook my head no. It wasn't. But my line was the latest ones to come over. Uh, I found in family history the record of Fanny Francis Hayes and Andrew Clothier. I don't know if you can see that or not. This is
Yeah.
actual marriage contract. Says Andrew Clothier, widower, Francis Hayes, spinster, united in the church, 1,800 and what does it say? 83? 20, 20, I'm sorry. And it's, as you notice at the bottom, the place to sign, they had to put an X because they were illiterate. Hold it still there. It's at the bottom. Go the other way. Go the other way. There you go. There's the X. The minister would have to write in their name. Anyway, that's Fanny and Andrew. They came over to Canada, settled in the area near Niagara Falls. We visited there a number of years ago. But one of their sons, Eli, actually moved down to Western Iowa through Michigan in 1861. There's Eli. Eli was my great grandfather. He's the one he's the one responsible for getting us into the church. As you know, Western Iowa in 1861 was a hotbed of restoration activity. It didn't take long for Eli to be baptized, ordained an elder, and became district president of the church in that area. So my family was introduced to the church by my great grandfather, Eli. He was said to be often preach in the pulpit without shoes and without a proper coat. It's all he could afford. So my father, Ivan, grew up in Dow City in that same area of Western Iowa. Yeah, that's right. My mother, Leela, was a good Methodist of the German heritage who came over from Eastern Iowa to Dow City to teach school. And the school mom was immediately courted by my father. They eventually married, had two boys, myself and my younger brother, Robert. Now, when Bob was an infant, we've got that. Bob's a younger. You can maybe tell a resemblance. Uh, when Bob was an infant and I was almost 3 years old, we moved to Independence when there would be more church activities for us to enjoy. Some of you may have known Bob. He was a well known pediatrician in Independence until he passed away, and he died way too early, 15 years ago now, and he was my younger brother. This is a park that the city named in his honor. He was very active in church activities, city activities, and of course, medical activities. We miss him a lot. 15 years ago, he's been gone. He had a mole on his back, which metastasized before he could catch it. He always said, doctors are the worst ones to take care of themselves. It's not a pleasant death. So Dad got a job at the Sugar Creek Standard Oil Refinery, started making payments on a 40-acre farm northeast of Independence. He was pastor of a number of churches around Independence. And so it meant that he would get up early, do chores, go to work, come home, do more chores, go back to church for a meeting. You know how that goes sometimes. Mom felt she needed to stay home as long as Bob and I were young. But they saw that we had music lessons and all kinds of things, everything we needed. We didn't realize it at the time, but we were poor. We'd just come out of the Depression. Mom, in fact, I remember making shirts for us out of the cloth sacks that they used to put chicken feed in. It was specially designed for that purpose, to make clothing. We lived for a while, quite a while, actually, in a basement home until we had the money to put a house on top of it. I was in high school by that time. Bob and I walked to school every day. There's a 2-room country school a mile and a half away. We walked rain or shine, snow or sleet. And since I began school at the age of 5.5, and since I was persuaded to skip the 6th grade, I actually arrived at Independence Junior High for 9th grade at the age of only 12. There's no school bus at that point, so Dad would take me in to school on his way to work, and he would pick me up on the way home. So that gave me lots of time to do my homework, to work in the library a little, and to walk uptown to the Woolworths to get the 15-cent chocolate sodas they offer. And on the way to see the TV, the little TV screens in the window at Western Auto. I'd had piano lessons since I was age 5. I actually played for junior church for a while before I played for church up the big church. But I was also recruited by the music director of the schools in Independence to take up a band instrument. I began on the clarinet, was soon promoted, quote unquote, to bassoon, which I continued to play until my Parkinson's disease put a stop to that a few years ago. Perhaps miraculously, however, my right hand tremor was stilled whenever I played the organ for church. When it came time to go to college, there was no choice, it had to be Graceland. For lack of a better idea, I decided to become a music major. After 2 years at Graceland, I finished my degree at Kansas State College at Pittsburgh, who had been recruiting music majors heavily at Graceland. Famous people like Ken Cooper, Don Brashears, and others preceded me there at Pittsburgh. I taught part time during my senior year at Pittsburgh at the parochial school. I had the band an hour every day, marching, concert. I was paid, I think, $50 a month for directing the band, but it gave me good experience. My first full time job after graduation was to teach music at Wellington, Missouri, just northeast of Independence. Now, I was a prime target for the draft in those days. So before I signed my contract for the second year, I checked with the craft board in Independence. They said, "Oh no, we're not close to you at all. You can safely sign the contract." As luck would have it, however, the first day of classes, my second year at Wellington, I received my notice to report for my physical. Now, my superintendent, his name, by the way, was Charles Church. He was a very good superintendent. He was anxious to keep me as long as possible. So he pulled some strings, got me in a National Guard unit, which is kind of hard to do in those days, in Lexington, Missouri. That meant, of course, that I would have to report for basic training in March of that year. So in March, I marched. I don't have any pictures of my military experience, unfortunately. I was one of what they call the 6 month wonders, 6 month National Guard in and out. Except that I actually got out in 5.5 months. I'll tell you more about that later. Let me back up a little bit so I don't forget the best part. During my freshman year at Graceland, I had met a very interesting young lady. Now, in Harold Neal's orchestra, the bassoons sat just behind the violas. So it came to pass that I fell in love with the back of the head of a high school senior with the pretty Tahitian name of Luita. I guess I didn't consider it proper for a big college man to date a high school senior. So I waited until the end of the year after she had graduated from high school to ask her for a date. We went to the Coliseum. Do you remember that date? Well, what was interesting about it, I didn't know, she didn't tell me for years afterwards. She'd seen the same movie the night before with the cello player, Frank Sure. It was years before I found that out. The next year we dated quite a lot at Graceland, but by the end of the year, we were going our separate ways. I was going to Pittsburgh, she was staying at Graceland. During my junior and senior year, however, I come to realize that there was no one else that seemed even came close to my pretty viola player with a pretty Tahitian name. So we eventually got back together again. I'm glad we did. By that time, however, she had committed to teach in South America. And I was going for 6 months at Fort Leonard Wood. So we wrote letters that year. I remember the little post office at Wellington. When I'd bring in a letter, the lady behind the desk would be all excited. Oh, South America's out. We never have mail to go there. She was all excited. I was writing a letter to South America. You said, did you keep my letters?
I do. I still have them in my file.
Get some of them out and read them. So after that year, we decided that it would be a good idea to go to the University of Iowa and work on our master's degree in music. And by Thanksgiving, we were engaged. So during their Easter break, on April the 16th, 1960, sounds like the organization of the church, Apostle Charles Neff married us in the Lamoni church. Oh, that's as our parents. She's having my that's all right. My AV person, AV assistant's having a little problem. But that fall,
this is our parents.
yeah.
Okay. And then one more picture of the way.
Oh, here's shows how skinny we were in those days. Who made the cake?
Well, the cake was made by Joyce Stevenson's mother, Valentine, and she was the secretary uh, in the stake office there, but she was very talented in making cakes. We were poor and we didn't spend much money on the wedding, but that's not what's important.
So also by that fall, I'd been hired to teach music at Graceland, to join the music faculty. I took over I took over the band, which Harold Neal's anxious to get rid of. Excuse me, because of the marching. Harold was a Canadian violinist. He knew nothing about marching band. When I came and onto the faculty, he would tell me every day, he'd say, every night I get down on my knees and thank the Lord that Dick is here to do the marching. I also taught organ that year. Ollie Houston was on leave for his doctorate. I was only 23 years old at that point. That may have been the youngest faculty member ever to join the Graceland faculty. But I had 2 years of full-time teaching, 2 years part-time, including teaching the band at Regina High School in Iowa City during my master's degree work. I actually started the band at Regina. There was a new high school in those days. I'd like to go back and see how they're doing. And I was also enjoyed being on the staff of the marching band, Iowa Hawkeye Marching Band. Each of the graduate assistants had a particular rank they looked out for. I had the sousaphones. They called us Band-Aids. We were the Band-Aids. I want to come back for a moment to my military experience. I said I was probably only the first person ever to get out of basic training in 5.5 months. Because of my mother. My mother is the most intelligent person I ever met. She could read a book in one night, scan it, read it. She wrote to me down at Fort Leonard Wood and she said, you know, Richard, if you're going to go back to for your master's degree work, school's going to start before you get there. And she said, I have an idea. She said, why don't you write a letter to a person, a church member in Washington, D.C., called Stanley Fike. Stanley Fike, as it turned out, was the brother of my bassoon teacher, Wallace Fike, and he was also the private secretary to Senator Stuart Symington. Some of you may remember Stuart Symington. He was a big gun in charge of the Armed Forces Committee, I believe, in the Senate. Anyway, I wrote the letter and didn't hear anything for a couple of weeks. By that time, I was doing my winding up my duty at the fire department in in Fort Leonard Wood. That was interesting. I enjoyed about 5 or 6 weeks in the fire department. We would go out for fires whenever an airplane would land in case that they started a fire. We had many times we would go out for grass fires, and, often the basic training people with their artillery, with their target practice, would start a fire, and my colonel would come up to them and say, "The second lieutenant's in charge of the training." Of course, the fire by that time was burning quite well, and he said, "Lieutenant, how long did you say this fire had been burning?" "Oh, it just started, sir. Just started." He said, "It doesn't look like that to me." Anyway, we'd have to put out the fire. Anyway, my colonel, a couple of weeks after I wrote that letter, called me into his office in the fire department. He had a letter in his hand. The letter was from the commanding general of Fort Leonard Wood, and he said, "Clothier, I don't know who you know, but you must know somebody." He says, "I've never known a 6 month wonder to get out 2 weeks early." He says, "Pack your bags and get out of here." So I saluted smartly and said, "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." And I was out. I did get a little bit of the flavor of what happens when Richard know when you go like to the office. We had ate at the officers' mess. We didn't have our own mess, so we went to that. That officers' mess, at least in those days, was like golden buffet on steroids. It was amazing. So my National Guard experience, just briefly, I when I got to Iowa City, I joined the band at the National Guard, Iowa National Guard band at Fairfield, which was good because we got to ride to summer camp on a bus, and we only had one night of bivouac, which the rest of the people had to bivouac every night. It was nice because when I came to Graceland, then I was too far away from a unit to have drills. So I was put in what they call a control group, which meant I didn't have to go to any drills or meetings. I thought I was in heaven. That was wonderful. Except that 1961, in the fall of 1961, President Kennedy called up the reserves because of the Berlin crisis. There was saber rattling. I got my notice to report to Fort Lewis, Washington in about a week. Chaos. We had to scramble around who will do this job, who will do that. I was there for homecoming. The homecoming band show was to be my last one. We finished the show with a G. Unbeknownst to me, the kids changed the G at the end to a C and made a comment. Had the PA announcer make a announcement about that I was be leaving. That was good because after the half, Lee Hart, who some of you may know, came down to where the band was. He said, "Dick, you don't have to go to the service." I said, "Well, that's great. I'm glad to know that." And he said, "We've got you're getting the ordained ministers that teach at Graceland are given the protective status on the taxes. You're considered ministers for by the IRS." He said, "We've had like Peter, Caswell, Philip Caswell, other people in independence that have got out of the service, got out of the activities because of that." So he said, I said, "I'll try it." The next, that was Saturday. Monday morning, I was sitting outside Harvey Grice's office. Harvey was president of Graceland. Harvey was also colonel in the reserve, so I wasn't sure how he would take this. I said, "Harvey," I told him about the situation. I said, "Harvey, I've got a telegram here. I'd like the college to send a telegram, but if you don't want to, I just want you to know that I will." He studied a while, looked up and down. He said, we'll send it ourselves." Before noon, I had a phone call. "Cancel your orders."
Wow.
It was a blessing, which I'll never forget. So back to my Graceland experience. When Harold Neal went to Independence to take Franklin Weddle's place, I took over the orchestra, which I dearly love. Do we have a picture of the orchestra?
Yeah, I want to interrupt you a moment.
Yeah.
Putting on this picture, I just want you to see what a handsome, just a minute. What a handsome guy he was then. This is him all dressed up with his white tie, ready to conduct the orchestra.
What do you mean then?
Yeah. Okay. Well, okay. No comment. All right. Here he is.
My AV person has gone off.
Okay. Here's him directing the orchestra up to close. And here's one. I'm not very sure it's clear, but the important thing is the situation and the location. You want to tell about it, Dick?
Yeah. This was
I'm trying to get it on.
We played a world
Let me
conference.
get it so they can really see
A
it.
number of years. Let me get a drink here.
All right.
This shows how big the orchestra was in those days. We did amazing works. Notice the concert master's chair. There's an older man sitting there.
It's clear over here too. Well, never mind.
That's Joseph Radianov, who is our Bulgarian violinist. Dave Kleinfelder was getting faculty members from Bulgaria, a number of places, to come over and teach. And I said to him one day, "Why don't we get a musician?" So he worked on it, and it turns out that Joseph Radianov, who was the best known violinist in Bulgaria, wanted to get away for a semester. And so he taught for us. It was an amazing year. At that conference, he played the Bruch Violin Concerto with us. The audience jumped to their feet. And in those days, the audiences were big for Graceland night and warm. And on our way to the car after the concert, Joseph was interestingly very quiet. I said, "Joseph, what are you thinking about?" He said, Dick, tonight I understand the spirit of Graceland, what the spirit of Graceland is. It's love. I'll never forget that.
People love Graceland.
That's right.
I don't know if this was right at the edge of this picture, which I'm having trouble saying. Okay, right at the right hand edge.
Yeah.
He's the only one with a kind of a bald head, sitting the closest to Dick in the front of the stage. Okay.
Tonight, I understand the spirit of Graceland. Joseph Rodelnoff was the Gracelander that night. By the 1970s, we decided to make Graceland our life stewardship. We'd build a house on 2nd Street, prefab house, on a lot we purchased from Charles Hyde. Charles is the husband of music teacher Mabel Carlisle Hyde. And he was also he's also the high in IV. But we thought it would be good to have an opportunity to break up our years at Graceland. We'd been there 13 years. We intended to stay forever. We thought it'd be good to have a break for a year. So we put out some applications. Nothing much came of it because both of us wanted a job, and most of the overseas schools only had one music teacher. But we had a friend at the American School in London who urged us to put an application in, so we did. So what I'm going to tell you next is a true miracle. It's something that could not have happened, but it did. We were hired over hundreds of applications without an interview, without any previous contact. We got a phone call that one spring morning from the assistant headmaster saying, we'd like you to come over to teach for us, to run the music department. It was a brand new school, amazing facilities, amazing teaching, incredible. David's on. He can he can can he can confirm that. We
Yeah, very very good school, very good experience. The whole thing, being in London. Plus, it was a good private school. Yeah, good teachers.
everything was great at the school except the music department was a mess, and they saw that I was a department head, had my doctorate, was the head of the department at Graceland, so they thought I could shake up the music department, which I did in that year.
Well, it was also largely from an alumni of Graceland that was teaching at the school, and he gave them a really good advice. Sorry, I can't think of the word.
Yeah.
He recommended Dick highly.
Lou, we can't hear you.
Anybody from Graceland?
There you go.
Yeah, we heard the last phrase.
Yeah.
There was an alumni teaching at that school. And so when he found out we had applied, he gave us a high recommendation.
It's David Holmes from California. Some of you may know him. So early one morning, we got that call. We talked to the Graceland president. Graceland offered us 1 year leave of absence. So the four of us were off for London. As I remember, we took the cheapest flight, which was Icelandic. That year was going to Minneapolis. And we drove our station wagon up there and stored it at the home of Danny Waite, good friend for that year. So, of course, we love London. It was a fantastic school, wonderful place. What is it?
Are you ready for
Yeah,
this?
yeah.
Okay. This is our Christmas card, the very first year. David, you were in the fifth grade. And behind us is the Tower Bridge next to the Tower of London. And I'll go ahead and show the
Can you
others.
can you hear Louita?
Yes.
Okay. This is Dick. Dick will probably tell you that 3 years later, we went back to London and we actually bought a house. This is one of those black and white winds architect in a black and white neighborhood. That's not race, that's the houses. And you can see how much David has grown in that time. And this is, I think this, and I should have shown second. This is our family across the Thames. Oh, shoot.
Big Ben.
Can you get that? Okay,
Yeah,
we're, yeah, thanks, Dick. We're across the river from the Big Ben and the Westminster government buildings. But that is probably when we first went over the second time. Okay.
So we love London. We travel all around and on the continent as well as in England, all the activities of a major city. And by the end of that year, we were sorry we couldn't stay. However, before we left, the headmaster virtually offered us the opportunity to come back after that year if we wanted to become the assistant principal of the high school. That was another job that he wanted to get rid of and thought I could take cover. So this time we got a 2 year leave of absence from Graceland and we're off again. Then of course, even after that 2 years, we really didn't want to come home. So we actually resigned from Graceland and stayed 3 more years in London. Then with the Graceland Orchestra job open again, with the prospects of a new facility, the Shaw Center, and with the kids coming back, graduating from high school and coming back to the States, we returned here in 1980 to stay until our retirement 20 years later. And we're still here. London, however, has always felt like our second home. we took winter terms to London almost every year. You tell about a winter like it. And that's all right. So we spent Januaries in London. We spent every second or third semester there also, usually house sitting. Every second or third summer there, usually house sitting for friends on the American School faculty. Unfortunately, all of our former colleagues are gone now, and we're not very good travelers anyway, so we haven't been back for a while, but it always will be our second home. I haven't got there yet. We did get one single semester leave of absence along the way, beside the one which fulfilled the residency for my doctorate. So during the whole spring semester of 1995, we were able to go over and spend the time house sitting at the home of a couple of colleagues at London. That's when I wrote my first book on hymns of the church. And Louita got a taste of seminary. This is my first book on hymns. I wrote to all the authors. I wrote to all the authors of hymns of the church, their living authors, and I asked them about themselves and about their hymns. And I was amazed to find out that such a voluminous copies of letters. They were so anxious to hear about, to tell me about their hymns. I decided to put it in a book. So the fact that you got into seminary was a kind of a miracle too.
Well, it was at Oxford. Yes.
Lean over and tell about it.
Well, I knew I didn't want to spend. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I knew I didn't.
Barely.
All right. I knew. Where is the mic?
It's up
There you
here.
go.
Okay. I knew I didn't want to spend that time just as a tourist. And I knew that when I did retire, I wanted to be spend a lot of my time devoted to the church. And so I asked the American church minister, what he would recommend, because I couldn't find anything that fit with my schedule of the time we were going to be there. And he suggested Mansfield College in Oxford, which is not Church of England or Catholic. It's the only one that's more like maybe the Methodists. But when I told him, what we believed and everything, he suggested that one. So when we were living in London that semester, I went out by high-speed train for an hour to get there. Later, we were living also in the house of other faculty members in the Cotswolds. If you all know, that's a beautiful area west of London. And then I could catch a quick little shuttle bus to Oxford, so it worked out perfectly. The interesting thing was that when I did my interview they said when he said they would offer me a scholarship, he said, we want more women. Well, I could do that. And we wanted more mature students, and I could do that. So I'm not sure it was my intelligence that attracted them, but my age and my gender. Anyway, it was a marvelous semester for me, just marvelous.
Sabbaticals were intended to spur you on to retirement. It actually, that made us want to retire more because we loved not having any assignments. One of the things I regretted most about going to England in 1973 was I had to resign from a committee putting together the hymns of the saints. I'd always loved the hymns of the church. And Ken Cooper, Barbara Higdon, and I would get together and drive once a month to Independence for committee meetings for hymns of the saints. It took 10 years for it to be published that way, once a month, but at least it was done. After my book on hymns was published, Oliver Houston suggested that we organize a hymn festival featuring background material from my book about the hymns. And at that point we had RLDS, LDS, restorationists, a lot of folks on the faculty. So we put together a hymn festival. That's the one in March 23rd that Jan talked about, where Oliver had a heart attack just before the hymn festival, and I had to persuade Jan to do the accompanying. So anyway, it was such a success that I ended up spending most of the rest of my retirement years up until recently doing historic hymn festivals at Nauvoo, Independence, Lamoni, Council Bluffs, and Kirtland. Here's one from Kirtland. And if you look closely, in the middle, I'm right here, and my brother Bob and his wife Sharon are sitting there next to Al Blair. They were there for that weekend. This was a celebration of the new visitor center. Grant McMurray spoke. We tried to recreate the there. Sorry, we tried to recreate something of the original original service of we
Dedication.
dedication. And one then later, the Mormons invited me to do the same thing. We had a choir that year of Mormons. I called them the Tabby Choir. That was what they called the Tabernacle Choir. And we rehearsed at 10 o'clock at night after the sessions were over. And we had enough people to fulfill the four corners.
Yeah.
There are four, if you know the Kirtland Temple, they're choir lofts in four corners. And we had an experience.
Yeah, I was singing in the choir in this particular corner of the. I was singing in the choir and I took this picture from the corner, one of the corners, four corners that were sung.
It was quite an experience. So I've lots of experiences in that. And then my second book on hymns was written at the express request of historians like Barb Walden and John Hamer. It was specifically for the sesquicentennial celebration of the church. It was 150 years of hymn. And this one, I talked about each of the hymnals of the church from Emma Smith on. And so that was what that book was all about. I'm going to stop in just a minute and ask for questions. I haven't mentioned the work on the organs, including the Shaw Center organ that the Cassavant was persuaded to build because of the Shaws donating the money. I'll just tell this briefly. Rich, your mother, was president that year, and the Shaw Center had just been opened, and the Shaws were coming to for the conference there. This is J.R. Shaw, now gone, and Carol Shaw. Barbara called me and said, Dick, I'd like for you to take the Shaws on a tour, which I said I was glad to do. He said, and they're going to come back to this sit in an auditorium, and Les Shaw, who's gone now too, is going to ask you what else do we need. So he said, be ready. So I took the tour. They came back and sat down, and sure enough, Les said, "What do we still need here?" I said, "We'd always wanted to have an organ," and he said two words, "How much?" And I gave him a price, and that was all I heard about that until the money came in. Actually, I shouldn't say this, but by that time Bill was president, and he thought part of that money could be used other places, but he was anxious since he knew John Obetz suggested this organ that this would be what we wanted. So
The Cassavant.
yeah, Cassavant was not interested in such a little job until because they had done the Independence Temple, but we persuaded them that it was so important. Thanks to John Obert. This is interesting that one of the manuals is electronic, and there's a long reason for that, but I won't get into that.
Those are the Shaws.
Yeah, that's J.R. and Carol. Lots of experiences in the Shaw Center with concert series. When hundreds of people, hundreds of people signed up every year. I'm gonna have to clear my throat. Have questions? what can I tell you that I haven't already said?
Dick, this is Paul. Could you share with us, what was the attraction of London? Why did you have that deep desire to go on assignment, but then you decide to go back? Could you paint the picture for somebody who's never been to England?
It's a new, interesting, fascinating culture. It's a very much different from our culture over here. You want to say something about?
Well, he didn't say much about our experience with the church there, but we got so.
Can't hear you, Lou.
Oh, I mean, I don't know where I'm supposed to be looking.
That's good, right there.
That's good.
Okay, both the first year and when we went back, we'd gotten quite involved with the Enfield congregation in North London, and then also Dunfield House and church regional conferences and so forth. So that was one of the things that brought us back, was a love of the people of the church and what we could do there. I would say you can live in London and never, ever exhaust the possibilities of things to do. I had gotten with the London Suzuki Group and helped them build that up. And so that was another attraction. It's just, I don't know, there was just something about the culture and all of the possibilities for music and for all different kinds of things that just drew us back.
It's a different way of life, really. And Paul, I don't want to let this go without thanking you and Jack for setting up the March 23rd concert by Jan Crable. I think this is one of the reasons that I'm still here, actually. I look forward during my recovery, my first part of my recovery, to that experience so much. It meant a lot to me and still does. So I just want to thank you for doing that.
I'll second that.
Hey, Dick, I know we don't have much time here, but I know that typically they like to ask a question that has something to do with your faith, where you've come, where you are, and words of wisdom to the church. So I'm just going to give you an opportunity to do that. Like where are you at now in your faith or your faith journey, and what words of wisdom do you have for the church?
Well, actually, as I said when I began the evening, the morning, I should say, I would like to be much more involved than I am. I feel like the church is changing a lot, and that's good as long as it's guided by the Holy Spirit. I would like to see more people get involved, and I wish I could be involved myself. And I'm hoping someday I'll be able to do that. I think we have been moving in the right direction. I'm a little concerned about some of the new things, and of course, the loss of the historic sites is difficult for me. But I recognize that the money is needed, and I'm not sure what the future holds, but I keep praying that it will be a good future. You'd like to?
Well, I think you should know that at about age 20, I don't know what priesthood office he held at the time, but he was an assistant pastor at, what is it, Farview Heights? that's when I came back from London, he was assistant pastor of the Farview Heights Church in Independence. And you may not know, but he was also assistant pastor of Lamoni when who was the
Nelson Batter.
yeah, Nelson Batter was pastor. And so he has served the church mostly through his music and hymnology and so forth, but he's also served in administrative positions with the church.